Okay, great. So we're live. And then I'm just gonna pull.
And then when we get to Q&A, it's up to you. We can, do you want to stop sharing the screen?
Up to you, whatever
and
you
just do.
It might feel more interactive if we stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, okay. I see the button to stop share. So, okay.
Let's see. Okay.
It's great to be able to be talking about working from home when everyone's working from home.
I know.
Just has a new reality for everyone.
Yeah. I'm so excited to hear what you have to say about if it's here to stay and stuff, because I've been hearing so much for both sides. Yeah.
I'll say some things, but there's no way to know.
Yeah. No, totally. I know my brother, he lives in Vermont, but he works in Boston. So like
Okay,
what he did was he would just come stay at my parents' house 2 days a week. But now they've moved everything um, remote, and I think he's just gonna plan on just living there now, which is awesome if they keep it going after.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can start now. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome back to our webinar series, which occurs here on our Facebook page every Friday at noon live. Today we have with us John Slason, who is the Director of Future Mobility Planning at Resource Systems Group in Burlington, Vermont. John provides professional engineering and planning consulting services to public and private clients focused on the emerging big issues in transportation. His interest is on how we can leverage emerging technologies to improve our world with a growing population, funding challenges, aging infrastructure, and the changing climate, all while creating thriving and desirable places for us to live, work, and play. Today, John will share with us the latest research on trends in telecommuting and on whether some part of it is here to stay and what impacts it could have on our transportation system. So I'm going to pass it on to John now. If you have any questions during John's presentation, feel free to post them in the comments section, and after he's done speaking, we can go over the questions. John, thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you, everyone. And so now that planning role suddenly means how to help communities and agencies plan responses around this unfortunate pandemic. And so we'll be discussing some of the effects of the pandemic on transportation, as well as in a conversation on the telecommuting or working from home. And you can see I'm working from home today. Today, I think as of this morning, or yesterday, excuse me, there was 1.5 million cases of the COVID disease, and the U.S. is now the global epicenter of cases, something around 460,000 cases as of the latest that I've kept track. It has profound effects on our transportation system. and social distancing that we call it, or physical isolation, has taken different forms in different places. Today, there's a picture in front of you that shows the Spanish Steps in Rome. And I remember being at this particular location and being overwhelmed with people. And now you can see the stark reality that we have in front of us. However, there are some silver linings and benefits to the fact of reduced mobility and reduced travel. Is that this is an example just from the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's numerous photos online of now the Himalayas become visible from parts of India that they haven't seen it for over 30 years. And in this case, we're seeing parts per million of CO2 levels drop. I don't know what percentage that was, but 60 parts per million there in just a few weeks, with the significant decline in traffic. But there's a difficult reality to all this, is that we have a significant challenge for, and I put quotes for Main Street. For those of you in the Burlington area, you'll recognize this street as our core shopping district, as Church Street. And it's obvious the lack of commercial activity, socialization, the restaurants, everything is completely shut down to maintain the necessary social distancing that we need to fight off this horrible pandemic. But the other reality is that offices are empty. We have significant amounts of office space across the country that now are sitting empty, and people are trying to figure out what to do and where are we going to go from here. So that's going to be the topic that we have some interesting data points to discuss today. And I will say first and foremost, I don't have the answers, but I have some data points and some ways that we can explore this. And it'd be great to hear your feedback at the end of this to understand whether you think it's here to stay and what effect it might have on your industry. As we have this Facebook Live event, we have this dramatic shift to online platforms. Across the world, people are experiencing new ways to interact and be social with each other through isolation. Other ways our life has dramatically changed in the last few weeks. In New Hampshire, tollway traffic is down over 50% in just the last 4 weeks. The airline industry has had significant changes in their demand, down 95% in just over the last year. Our overall use of electricity is down, which again has maybe some positive benefits, not so much in New England because of our hydro demands, but in other parts of the country, you can imagine the climate benefits. The oil prices now, albeit OPEC, I believe, just was recently cutting back production again, but the oil prices are at their lowest level in 18 years. Again, though, with a lack of demand for travel. And this is recent news as of yesterday with 16.8 total unemployment claims in just the last few weeks. Few businesses are immune from this shock. And it's estimated that the unemployment rate now is approaching 20%. As just a point of reference, in 1933, we had a maximum unemployment rate of 24% in the height of the Great Depression. So we realize that economic activity is, unfortunately, it's linked to a lot of the ways that we use mobility. Google's coming to the fore with some recent data that's showing us how we're affected. This is a U.S. countrywide perspective. Transit stations are down 51% according to Google in this data. Workplaces alone are down nearly 40%, but residential travel and points of travel around the home are up 12%. So we still are requiring mobility. We're out there doing our essential services, doing our grocery shopping. Home repairs are up, and so other activities are happening. Google has a data point for Vermont as well, and you can see our change in transit is down 71%, and our workplace is a little lower than the U.S., just over 40%, and then the residential is near the same. Now, this is another data point from Unicast. It's a big data, passive data provider and aggregator. They're using cell phones, and every cell phone has a unique trace that these companies are able to aggregate. So much like Google had, this one this website provides a assessment of how your mobility has changed relative to your previous average, the pre-COVID situation. And it also links, it shows you on the next chart I'll show you, is that the correlation with the COVID pandemic. And so Vermont actually gets a grade A. We're doing a great job in terms of the way that we're socially distancing ourselves, that we have had over a 70% reduction in our non-essential travel. And we know that it's had profound effects. So that's what some of the other earlier data and the economic data, we realized that this does have a negative impact on many parts of our communities. But hopefully it means that Vermont can prevail and move quicker through this pandemic situation. And so this chart actually goes county by county, and you can see that other parts of Vermont are supposedly doing better in terms of reducing their non-essential travel. But Chittenden County, I think, with their hospital and just the population that we have a little bit less ability to reduce that net travel. And then just on this chart, as I referenced, we reference the COVID cases on a daily basis on this chart. And this website that's linked on the PDF, on the PowerPoint, you can visit after this presentation, and you can explore state by state, county by county. And it does show that social distancing really does matter for the health of our community. Now, public transit, I'm not going to spend much time on public transit because I know that I believe Stephen Falble is going to be speaking to you in another couple weeks. And public transit has a real difficulty right now. We are seeing overall demand of down nearly 80% in travel. And while that's good for social distancing and the health of our pandemic, it is a real struggle for our agencies. And I don't have the Vermont GMT data, but I hope that maybe Stephen might bring that to you all. And transit, for instance, is just an application that they track worldwide transit. And if you go to this website, you can go to specific agencies all around the world and see how they've been affected by the pandemic. Now, shifting into the online interaction, we've seen that U.S. remote work has gone up 2 to 3 times in just over 2 months. Zoom, the common platform that's been used widely, has seen daily average users increase from 10 million up to 200 million in just the last 3 weeks. And then Microsoft, through their Teams program, that's been their primary online interaction tool, has seen daily record of meeting minutes. So we go from 2.7 billion meeting minutes in a single day, and that's up again 200% from 900 million meeting minutes in mid-March. So people are overwhelmingly shifting to the online platforms. Another data point here is somewhat similar, is that it again shows an increase of those using the virtual private network, the VPNs, to connect to your systems remotely. This shows the dramatic increase as the shutdowns start to occur, people shifted to their VPNs. This website tracks dates over time, and there was a long-term average of approximately 27%. And then these peaks before were holidays, when people would work from home on these government holidays. But now you can see that we're up closer to 64% of people registering their VPNs working from home. You can see how the points are starting to combine and coalesce around this number, around 60% or so. This is a poll recently released from Gallup that they have now estimated that about 62% of US workers are working remotely to some degree. And this is the end of March, early April timeframe. And you can see the dramatic increase from just the mid-March. So we're just talking about just the latter half of the most recent month and the dramatic increase in working remotely. So the question is, are we changing our behaviors? Working remotely requires new behaviors to be learned. Talking like we are today is a challenge for many of us. We're not used to this way to engagement. I like being in front of people face to face, and we're doing the best we can. But we're also seeing that other behaviors are changing. In this way, Microsoft has released some data that they're trying to understand how the actual behaviors of meetings are changing. And in this case, they're saying that their product of Teams is saying they're using it longer during the day. And they say they may not necessarily mean people are working longer, but that their people are breaking up the day. They're taking more productivity breaks, more flexibility. It allows them to do the other obligations that they have within their day. I think that's a really powerful benefit of working from home, and others recognize that as well. Jared from Microsoft mentions that the simplest example of how meeting have changed is that the chat function now, where before those people on the remote end of any meeting was always the people on the telephone. You're scratchy and you're saying, what are you saying? Can you speak up? Now with the online platforms and the video calls, we're all at equals. And we realize that it's video, it's audio, it's then also chatting. Everything has to be incorporated. And then we ourselves are changing our behaviors to become more multimodal in the way that we treat our meetings. And so it will change the way that co-working happens. It will change the way that working happens. And so that we will be looking at how to engage more online, more interactively, although remotely. And this might then have profound ramifications for how do we facilitate public meetings? How do we do other things in this new context? So now jumping into, is this behavior going to stick? How is it going to change us? These experiences will guide our expectations. This is from a Politico magazine where they discussed big thinkers. And this editor mentioned that not every job can be done remotely, but people are learning, and that difference is, and they're realizing that now, just with the ability to download an application, and in the past it was permission from their bosses, but now it's being forced upon them, that they realize that how seamless this can be. We realize now that awful lot of meetings, potentially doctor's appointments and classes, can really be done remotely, or in this case, referenced by an email, she said. And now we realize that it can be. This is going to be a bottom-up explosion in demand for this increased flexibility. An example that there's not many that we can draw upon, but there was a study in 2017 by Oxford economists that just pointed out that a simple 2-day London tube strike. So we're already in a shutdown for I don't know how many weeks, about a month in Vermont, and 5% of London commuters permanently switched their travel behavior after that two-day strike. You can only imagine what percentage might be here, as we've been forced to explore other options. And so the authors of that study posited that changing routes for those few days of disruption gave enough confidence that these commuters found other desirable options. So RSG expects that some degree of permanent shift will result from the COVID pandemic. So a few more reasons for you. Unfortunately, we're in this for the long haul. This is a study from the Imperial College of Medicine in the UK. And I've seen this discussed in many other literatures and online journals at this point, but this is a chart that they put together in this research. And what this chart shows is that we're going to have these periodic waves of infection that will affect our communities. And what's going to happen is that we will have intermediate social distancing triggered by trends in the disease, so that we can temporarily relax and visit with each other, maintain face-to-face communications, but then we need to have a plan put in place for when we need to introduce social distancing again. There will be a new normal as of this. China is our leading example of a country that's past the peak of new infections for this initial wave. Microsoft is still of new team users every day in the country compared to the end of January. However, it's still documented that travel restrictions are still in place. They have temperature checks throughout their cities. and there's strict quarantines, even those for returning travelers within their own country. Singapore has implemented a circuit breaker model where they have now a defined set of responses so that if the wave of infection were to approach again, they immediately can implement the circuit breaker. And they're using testing to identify where workers and where students must be sent home if there's an outbreak in a certain part of a city. And everyone is rethinking remote work. The CBRE, large industry company that owns and maintains massive amounts of commercial real estate, they do research on this, and this is a recent quote that remote work is something they're thinking a lot about. And people are being forced to do it, but we will think that some will inevitably stick. Their question is for how many and for how long? And that is the question for all of us. But they're concerned about who needs office space. In addition to the countless small retail and restaurant businesses that are unfortunately going to be permanently vacated after this economic situation, there's going to be a growing number of corporate chains that may have more cash flow that are also are unwilling to pay their rent. As of today, Staples, Subway, and Mattress Firm have all stopped paying their rent. WeWork, the massive co-working office space, has stopped paying rent at some of their U.S. locations. And these are just the big firms. You can let alone the smaller organizations that are going to rethink, do we need to have that extra overhead and office space to bring us all together? And maybe the answer is yes, but it may be a little smaller. So what is this teleworking looking like? The pre-COVID work from home percentage. Vermont actually had a pretty high percentage of our working from home. Depending on which survey and how many years you're going back to, Vermont was somewhere around 6.5 to about 7.4% of your working from home percentage, according to the American Community Survey. Some other data points here, just throwing it at you, is that their Global Workplace Analytics, they're an organization that study working from home globally. They estimated that, this is pre-COVID estimate, that 56% of the US workforce holds a job that could be compatible, at least partially, with remote work. Gallup shows that 43% of the workforce works at home already at least some of the time. And then according to the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 16% of the workforce already work remotely as well. So Gallup recently did a poll for this COVID situation, is they said once restrictions on business and schools are lifted, if your employer left it up to you, what would you prefer to do? 59% say they want to work remotely as much as possible. 41% said going back to the office as much as you previously did. They made a pretty stark choice in this case, and we know there's a lot of nuances. But if 59% of people say we want to work remotely as much as possible, and given the other benefits that we've discussed, it's clear that we're going to see some changes. So to summarize, why is this going to stick? There's fears of poor work outcomes among managers and executives that are not coming to fruition. For years, people were not allowed to work remotely. There either wasn't enough trust or just lack of experience with the technology, or inexperience with the experience to do that. They are going to see increased demand from employees for the reasons that we've just discussed. Now, for this COVID situation, it's apparent that there's going to be increased pressure for disaster preparedness. We have a more resilient workforce if we can have more flexibility about where and when do we work. There's the increased awareness of the cost savings opportunities from the organization's point of view, let alone the individual. If I'm not commuting and spending money on my commute, my money will be spent elsewhere. There's also the increased awareness of the potential impact on sustainability. I mentioned the CO2 impact, and then let alone there's some other pollution impacts that are clear that if we reduce our travel. The Global Workplace Analytics that I mentioned before estimated that post-COVID, they would see between 25 and 30% of the workforce working at home 1 or more days a week. Compare that to the 7% or so today in Vermont. So this is a very approximate, rough estimate, and I'm sharing the assumptions here on this chart, but this is work that I did this is work that actually is done a long time ago that I've refreshed for this purpose today, looking at what types of industries. These are our 2017 jobs in Vermont by employment sector. The big unknown is the economic shock that this is going to cause, and we don't know which jobs are going to shift. That's one of the first unknowns here. The second unknown is trying to estimate what types of jobs would be suitable to a remote working condition, and certain industries are more flexible than others. However, even really manufacturing heavy involved personnel might have administrative jobs that they can move off-site. So let alone, I think every industry has an opportunity, and that's where this chart shows, for instance, how forestry, fishing, and related activities, I said maybe 20% of the staff could be remote. Maybe at a low, you have 5%. So by looking at that probabilities and the number of jobs, I estimated that if there's a low uptake in remote workforce, it might be 9% post-COVID. And then at a medium uptake, it's closer to the other estimate that was put together, around the 22%. And then maybe based on our mix of jobs, and this is pre-COVID job mix, maybe a high uptake of around 37% would be suitable for a remote workforce. So how much impact do we have here? We realize, though, that work from home is only one part of the travel equation. If we're concerned about vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, we have to realize that we still have mobility needs for essential trips if we happen to be in a social lockdown situation, or if we are not in a lockdown situation, we're going to go and do these personal trips, the grocery stores, the shopping, the doctors, the recreation. And we realize that those trips actually meet 70% of our travel demand. So we're still, even if we work from home, it's only going to be a fraction of our total miles that we could be reducing. But we also see that the post-pandemic, some jobs and sectors might shift. The economic impact will be shifting. This chart here in the bottom left just is a recent research from this RBC research organization that shows as of March, because of the pandemic, we actually now have a majority of people who have now purchased groceries online for the first time. I have a situation with little kids at home, and I could see the benefit of this. So I think there's going to be new people trying new things, and some of those behaviors might stick. So what would our world look like? But even more important, what do we want our world to look like in a post-pandemic situation? A quick introduction to RSG and what we do professionally. RSG is a firm, over 100 professional staff across 8 offices across the country. We are over 30 years in business, founded in 1986, and our core market is in transportation, namely behavior and forecasting. We have these 3 categories of capabilities. We have choice modeling, travel forecasting, and planning. And these things are being brought to bear now as to forecasting what this COVID situation might unfold for us. In the choice modeling, we understand what people are willing to pay, what people demand, and what types of in-future scenarios. In travel forecasting, then, we build the model to then say, how are those choices going to manifest into a future situation when faced with all these other changes, be it different land uses, be it in different demographics. And then planning puts them together. Planning is building a shared vision with different stakeholders and saying, how would you want your world to look? Let's find the way to backcast and get there. So the 4 things that RSG is now doing is that we are quickly deploying surveys. We're targeted response monitoring. We're doing observed cell phone response monitoring through smartphone and surveys, and then doing scenario planning with clients. And a quick summary of these is that we have some certain clients now that are asking for us to set up web-based panel surveys to track people's behaviors now, and then over the next few months, as this pandemic hopefully moves out. We'll be setting up questionnaires, incorporating mapping, and other travel behavior suites. And then the big data, passive data side is that this is a situation, the data here shows Grand Central Terminal in New York City. We're trying to track how many unique cell phone pings were being observed, and we can do a day-by-day analysis and start to tell communities how their behavior and social distancing is actually happening and whether certain responses can be influenced. It happened tomorrow if we removed our stay-at-home order. We can start tracking these with these cell phone products. RSG also has a GPS phone-based survey, and people can download this onto their phone. You have full permission, and you would be taking surveys to say, why did you travel, who traveled, what precautions. We're having interest from communities that are looking to verify that certain businesses and certain individuals are experiencing things the correct way in this COVID pandemic, meaning we have a community in the southern U.S. that they need verification to say that our business is actually behaving appropriately in this COVID. So they want to get a bunch of people to take this survey, go about their business, and saying, did you see hand washing? Did you see disinfecting sprays? Did you see people wearing masks? And you get this social surveying type of buy-in, and so we're getting this type of information out there to our clients. And then lastly, what excites me the most is building the what-if scenarios. Is that if we can identify the goals and visions of what should be achieved in the future, and identify the metrics to say, are we achieving those? Then we can develop models, and the type of model that I use is called a strategic model, where we can test hundreds of combinations of various inputs and vary them to small degrees, and so you can have hundreds of combinations being tested. And we can start to evaluate what would happen with more people working from home, and then you say, how would it shift our employee makeup? And then what happens if we put the rest of the people who are not working from home in high capacity transit? You can start to see the system and understand how much vehicle miles traveled might be impacted by these situations. And then we also evaluate the effects of technologies and other external drivers on behavior change. So I've covered a lot, and I really look forward to your questions. And I hope that it covered telecommuting appropriately, but also gave you an insight into some of the other travel pieces and complexities of this horrible pandemic. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. We have a few questions. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can? Perfect. Okay, so the first question is, are you concerned that after COVID-19, public transit will not bounce back in the same way that car travel will? And in fact, that many choice transit users, those who have other options, may abandon transit?
Yeah, I absolutely. I'm having a conversation with a micro-transit provider currently in the shared mobility space, so that's not even the fixed route transits, which already were showing a decline in ridership. And then I mentioned that chart from the Imperial UK, which I have a high degree of confidence in that we're going to have some waves of infection until we can get a vaccine. And shared mobility, fixed route transit being the kind of the lowest priority of that, is going to be the most affected. Those choice riders are going to have options to either share with fewer people. So that's where the micro transit, the small vans might be actually more preferable, and you can maybe clean them better. You'll have more accountability. So I'm definitely worried about our fixed route transit system and the role that choice riders have in subsidizing the financial viability of those services.
Okay, and on the other side of that, might some people have learned that they can work from home, be more likely to stay home and less likely to commute?
Absolutely. The stats were 7% today are people who are currently telecommuting in Vermont. And if the data suggests that it may be upwards around 60% in this situation. I know many people, this is suboptimal conditions. You have kids in the background, you have people at home, you have housemates, you have a second room here that are being used as your office. So not everyone's interested or willing to work from home. So if that 60% can be more moderated down, I think at 20%, it all also depends on the time horizon that you're looking at.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, I think it's going to be increased above the 7% for sure.
Do you have any thoughts about what it says about parking lots and highway infrastructure?
That's the interesting case. That would depend on the amount of travel that's actually reduced. And there's two conditions here. One is, are we in a stable condition, but our behavior has changed, meaning the COVID is stable and that we're able to do our normal day-in-day business, but we've now changed to working from home. That's situation one. And then situation two is if we're in a social lockdown. Clearly in a social lockdown, we have excess capacity in all of our transportation infrastructure, and we should be doing other things with it if we're able to do so. So the likes of New York City and Bogota and other communities putting in temporary bike lanes, Burlington restricting parking on some streets and restricting maybe walking and biking. Those are the examples that we need now, packaged responses if this infection were to increase again, having a wave infection. But that first situation, I mentioned that the amount of working from home or the amount of commuting is only about 30% of anyone's household travel. If you would then only take 50 or 25% of people now working from home, it's still going to be only a 5 to 10% probably of net vehicle miles traveled being changed. And that may or may not be enough to significantly reimagine the existing transportation infrastructure that we have. We need the other pieces that have been the focus of sustainable transportation Vermont for years. The travel demand management, you need the incentives for not driving, and we need to provide the other alternatives.
Okay, and what is your sense of how increasing grocery delivery impacts VMT efficiency of getting groceries to people versus folks going in person to grocery stores? And are deliveries done per household, or are they delivering to multiple households per trip?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would be lying to you to know the answer. The difficulty in this is all about trip chaining. Most people, when they go to a shopping center, either groceries or the mall, whatever it might have been, you don't typically just go for one shot and you're done. Groceries sometimes is a nuance. In this case, it could result in equal VMT. If it's just a delivery from a grocery store to your home, that might have already happened anyway. So it's a like-for-like substitution. The worst case is then where you would have done 2 or 3 shopping trips together, and then now you're getting individual orders from those 3 places. And that's going to be only shown up in the details and the data that we want to collect. We hope that our public agencies are very interested in these questions as well.
What if we wanted to help people drive less? What would we do at this moment as people emerge from the pandemic?
It's a great question. I think we need to provide the alternatives in Vermont are limited. If I can think about Vermont, which our land use influences so much of our travel, and that's not going to change. There has been people surmising that the suburbs are going to be even more attractive in a post-COVID situation because it provides people more space. Where I am able to go outside in Vermont and go out in my lawn, there are cities now across the world that are not able to go outside at all. And so land use is so important to our travel decisions. We need to either make commitments to either fund transit with a frequency that would work for people, because we don't have the density just to get a few people on the few peak hour buses that occur. And we are also in situations where the density that is there, just the bus routes that already serve it don't go enough places. So I think it's a political commitment to more frequency on our transit systems. It's also then an ability to travel safer by other alternative modes. And again, it goes back to things that this organization and others have been trying to do for years, which are safer, better protection for bicyclists, and improved public transit. I think those are fundamental things from the transportation side, but we cannot lose sight that land use really influences travel behavior.
And this question is also related to travel behavior. Do you think that people will change their behavior regarding transportation after some of this subsides, or will they have to go back to their same old ways? How can we leverage this to get people to actually permanently change their transportation behavior?
I'm a believer that once people try things, you'll either agree or you'll disagree. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who have some positive outcomes from this working from home situation. And I would imagine that there's going to be a groundswell of people coming up to your employer and saying, I want flexibility to work 2 days a week from home. There could be a government mandate, as I mentioned, about the ability to respond to disaster. And if we need to start having a prepared plan for how we can deal with social distancing, if and when it's required again, then companies might need to be more prepared with the technology infrastructure, the VPNs, the laptops, the headsets, whatever it might be to work remotely. So I think there could be an honest question to say, as a government, do we need to ask our companies to start being officially more prepared for this? And then from a bottom-up point of view, I'm confident that there's going to be a groundswell of interest. And the companies who want to retain good employees and the companies that want to be responsive to their employees' needs will start providing some options to work from home.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was our last question. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all questions. We'll see you back here next Friday.